Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here at the Movement Podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to ask you to keep the conversation going. Please feel free to drop a comment or smash the like button. If you really like what you hear today, feel free to share the link on any of your social media platforms so your friends and family can get a chance to jump in as well. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I know you will.
I'd love to look at what the changes you feel like have happened in you personally, because I could sit here and talk for hours about the differences that I've seen in you just being close to you, working with you. But I'd love to see how you feel that you have shifted, because I kind of brought up at the beginning your dynamic with Pastor Ron, but now there's a new dynamic. There's a new dynamic in church flow. You've gone and actually you got your credentials.
Yes.
And are now, that's why we introduced you as Pastor Doris Turner, which was something I feel like 6 years ago wasn't even on the radar.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, when I started the credential, well, after Ron passed, I went and met with Pastor Doris and said, I really feel strong that God wants me to continue here, and I would love to continue working with as the young at heart leader and pastor. And so he said, great, we want you to be here. And so at that point, the church gave me credentials, and so as a pastor, but then I had to take it the next step and apply for credentials with the Assemblies of God. So when I did that, I thought I was just getting licensed, and I was actually ordained because of my years of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that was a huge, step for me, because I'm not a in the pulpit person, but just being a part of the 9 o'clock traditional service in a more of a leadership role. I help with closing out, the service with communion time. I mean, I just never would have done that before.
No.
Going to the hospital the first few times, I was petrified to go by myself and pray for somebody who's on life support or who's very ill. But now it's just like, oh, wow, I get this opportunity. This is just so amazing. I'm so thankful to do that. But other things, I guess one of the biggest things is I feel empowered by the Lord, and He's just given me, I'm more aware of His presence. I'm so grateful for the strength that I have a new level of strength from Him. If that's might not be the best way to describe it, but for just to be able to do what I'm doing, I'm so grateful and thankful.
It's incredible. Now, do you think that was something that you urged on yourself, that you're saying, you know what, I need to step into this, or something you had to do? I mean, I don't like to talk about to survive, but really to thrive in this new normal of your life without Pastor Ron. Is that something that you just wanted to do for yourself, or it's something that you needed to step up and adapt and change now that some piece of you is gone?
I think it was more to thrive in the ministry and to continue on. One of my great-grandmothers was one of the first Assembly of God ministers in the Assemblies of God. She lived in Ohio, and so in the back of my mind, I'm like, maybe, and not really knowing that this time in my life I would be an ordained minister of the Assemblies of God. It's very much of an honor and a blessing.
Absolutely. And that was only 2 years ago? 3? Oh, no, it was a little bit longer than that, wasn't it?
I think it'll be 3 years this year.
3 years ago. Wow.
Yes. So honored and blessed. And it's exciting to see, what God has. It's a little scary, the unknown. And stepping out in faith. It was definitely a stepping out in faith. And we've been talking about that in our fast that we're going through right now, is stepping out in faith, giving God, our entire life. And so I feel that's where I'm at.
Absolutely. So. It's, I think that's an encouragement to a lot of people that are trying to figure out, okay, now what? Because that's such a big, daunting question. I'm sure for people that just experienced loss is, okay, am I going back to things as they were? Because you can't. Because there's a piece of you, a large part of your life that is now not there. And so you either need to figure out how to fill those gaps yourself, bring people into your life that can help you fill those gaps. And for you, it really meant not that you couldn't have still been in ministry without doing the ordination or without being credentialed or just staying exactly who you were, but you stepped up and you almost filled the gap that Ron had been filling for many years as a young at hearts. He was, I like what he says, you're the slack lady. You were always behind the scenes, and you still, for the most part, tend to work the most behind the scenes, but now you're actually, like you said, stepping up and doing something. So I think that's something that people have to decide for themselves. Mm-hmm. Am I going to fill in the gaps of that loved one that I lost, or which I don't think there's a wrong or right answer, or am I just going to have to create a new normal? Maybe we can't do the same things that we used to do, which if you don't feel empowered to do that or called to do that, whether it's running a family business, whether it's living out the plans that you had for retirement with that loved one, sometimes I think we have to shift because we don't feel qualified or we don't feel called, or it's just something that one person by themselves can't accomplish. There's some great people that as a couple they were able to do some incredible things, and it's not that after the loss they can no longer do those things, but some things take two people.
They do. Well, my daughter reminded me, one of the biggest things you've probably learned is that you can't do what two people used to do. And I go, you're right. I know I've had to learn that. But just, I was talking the other day with her, and I said, well, I've had to learn to manage all my own home repairs,
Mm-hmm.
My car repairs, making sure I'm getting that serviced. And she said, yes, and you got a new hairstyle. And I said, yes, and I now have added some color. So,
Yes.
When you've grown up really kind of strict and brought up, you don't do these things, you can do these things. But anyway, I think one of the biggest things is establishing that new norm in your life. I chose to not hibernate and hide and just not be out, and I was able to step out without having to go through a lot of sadness. And I know there are people who do go through periods of depression and sadness, and I certainly pray for those people very much, that God will just help them to kind of get on the other side of that. But it is a process, and it's different for everyone in establishing that new norm. God, what do you have for me? But
question I had is, did you ever catch yourself trying to do what Ron did, even though it was outside of your strengths? Like, did you find yourself going, oh, well, Ron would always do this, so maybe I should jump in and do that, and then find like, whoa, I cannot do that, or I should not do that. Trying to, like we talked about, fill the gap that he left, but without realizing, hey, there's some things that he could do, I just cannot.
Right. Now I can mow my own lawn. I can't use the saw or the chainsaw or anything like that. I thought about it, but then I decided, no, I can't do that. So, I have done things that I didn't think I could do. There are some things that I've just chosen to say, no, I need to get somebody to help me with this. Some high up thing that's on a high ladder that
because he was a very skilled person and a very hard worker.
Yes, and there wasn't anything that he couldn't do. So when you have somebody in your life like that, it's very, very difficult to follow those footsteps, because I obviously can't do everything.
And did you feel pressure to try to fill those gaps at first, or at some point did you feel pressure that you had to do what he was doing?
I absolutely did.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. And I was reminded by family, you can hire somebody to do that. I go, yes, I know that. And
now you do.
Yes, exactly.
Or you call Becky and you're like, hey, you need to come over.
Yes, exactly.
Again, the growth that you've experienced, I mean, it's night and day. I think a few months ago in our family meeting, I just brought to the attention, like, you are, what do we call it, the most improved player on the team. Over the last 5 years, you have changed, adapted. I know it's because of your incredible daughters that keep asking you to, hey, Mom, let's put a little more color in your hair, or hey, let's try this new outfit, stuff like that. But the way you stepped up, like you said, when you first started taking some leadership in the 9 o'clock service, our traditional service, I'd almost have to give you a week's notice if you were praying to close out communion. Yes. And now, 8:45, I'm like, hey, do you mind? You're like, sure, I got it. Now, you're probably still at the back of your mind going, why didn't you tell me that last week? But you have adapted, and your flexibility is so incredible. I commend you on that. And I think that's something that everyone can do, and some it's more difficult for sure. But there is life after loss. There is. And, it's not going to be the same, but I think God gives you an opportunity in that to adapt and change, become someone that maybe you didn't even know you could be. And maybe that's the gift of it, is that you get to transform into who you were destined to be and created to be, even while experiencing that loss. So that's really cool. I want to finish off this episode with something that you have been actually working on for quite some time, because you do an incredible job of helping the families that have loss of loved ones. Our church, our size, unfortunately, we have to deal with a lot of loss.
We do.
A lot of loss, probably, I would say, oftentimes 2 or 3 funerals a month, which we try to do a meal for the family, different things like that. And you have brought in a lot of people that have helped you as part of your team now, so it's not all on you, because you did start to discover that, again, you can't do the work of 2 people or sometimes 5 people like you try to do.
Yes.
So you've brought on some incredible team members to do that. But we also figured out that through this process, there are major variances in the funeral preparation and the loss preparation, as far as wills, as far as setting up for funeral home arrangements, cremations, caskets, lots or plots, having ushers and paying for flowers and all these things, and where that all goes. It is a big endeavor. And you've been working on a kind of a portfolio binder that's going to help, that as soon as someone we find out has experienced loss, we'll be able to hand that to them, and it will give them an idea of what they need to plan for, especially unexpected.
Right.
As well as, and I hate that I'm not trying to point out anybody, but for anybody that has had to deal with funeral homes or arrangements, you can easily be taken advantage of. And
Definitely.
your cost incurred can rise dramatically.
Yes.
And so what you're trying to do is trying to give out information to help protect that. Walk us through a little bit about maybe some scenarios that you've seen people experience, or some things you look back and you go, oh my gosh, you really got ripped off, or stuff like that.
Well, I've been able to work with people and talk with them when their loved one has passed. And some of them have arrangements in place. They've already done some planning, and they know what they want to have, and as far as a service, and they've maybe already made a visit to the funeral home. But there was one family that I talked with, and I said, there's this funeral home over in your area that I believe if you would sit with them, just get a second quote or whatever on the casket, on the service, on just all of the different details that needed to be taken care of, I think that it would be a little more economical for you. And so sure enough, they met with them, and it was night and day difference. So just becoming familiar with some of the funeral homes in our area, they're all very kind and very nice, but some, when they're talking with the families, they provide much more than really what is needed to have a nice service and a comfortable service for the family. Typically, if someone is going to have a traditional funeral, it can be anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000.
Wow.
From the casket to the embalming to the plot, the lot, that it's actually a plot and the lot, and just all of the different details from, the clothing, the beautician that comes in. There's just so many different pieces and parts of that preparation. And I encourage families, you don't have to spend a lot of money to make it a comfortable service. Cremation can be accomplished anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500, and again, it's a personal preference. Nothing is ever in our information that we're preparing. It's just for information. We're not saying you have to go this way or that way.
But we do want you to be educated about what is needed, what maybe even by law is required for you to do with the body, and different arrangements that must be made. And then what are the excesses that you can get to choose for yourself? Hey, do you want to spend $1,500 on sandwiches in the waiting room for the family? And you're like, what?
Yes.
Like, what is required? And then what are those extras that you can make a decision based on your budget and what that allows? And I think that there is, and I don't know if this is from funeral home or from society, this idea that you have to have this lavish moment, or that in order to honor them, you need to spend so much of this money. And I know my parents, even up to a couple years ago, I think they sold their plots and said, we don't want to be, we don't want for you to have to spend even the money that we will to you, or the money that we've saved up to have a casket and a plot. They decided that they wanted to just be cremated. And then Brock and I will flip a coin on who has to deal with, no, I'm just kidding. And so they were just already trying to think forward and going, you know what, I want to let my kids know what is expected, so that they don't feel like, oh, we need to spend all this money to honor dad or honor mom. And I don't think it didn't come across gloomy as, hey, we're planning for our death or anything like that. It came across to me very loving, like, hey, I don't want to put this pressure on you that you've got to do all this stuff. Now, some families, some cultures, some traditions, maybe that's not the way it goes, but man, I totally thought that for myself. I'm like, man, I don't want to be a wealth drainer for my kids when I pass away. I want them to be able to celebrate me and celebrate the memories that we had together. But my dad was like, I don't want you to waste the money I want to give you on me. Right. And so how much of that do you find people struggle with in the funeral preparations?
Well, I think a lot of them are like, normally you have a viewing the night before, and then the service is the next day. More recently, there's a lot of families that are going just with everything in the same day. So having a viewing before the service, whether it's at 11 or say 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and that makes it more economical. Our church always provides a meal for the family, and so it just gives a time for the immediate family to come together. Maybe they've come from out of state, and we don't charge for them. We do it as a blessing as unto the family, just because we want to support them and be there for them. But I think the biggest thing is just to know that you don't have to give. If you have an insurance policy, you don't have to say, hey, I have X number of dollars in this policy, and this is what I can spend. You can just go in and say, this is what I would like. What would the cost be?
And we've seen instances where a funeral home director or a consultant, whatever they're called, which is preparing, asks for that number. Hey, so just so we know where we're working with, how much are they left with? Which I feel like is not a safe number to give someone. No,
not at all.
Because then they can immediately say, okay, how much of that can we get or whatever. As far as the visitation, different than that, for us at Christ Church, we try to make everything as really as free as we can, or as limited on cost as we can. Obviously, sometimes we have to turn the building over quickly because we have services, or we need a cleaning crew to come in, and so we still try to very much limit our cost. But if you want to do things at the funeral home, every room you occupy is another charge. Yes. Every person that they have to come in to help usher. One of the things I think that Christ Church does is such a good job, and this is really just giving information to you, the viewer, if you're part of Christ Church, man, use us. We use our pastoral staff as ushers. We try to do as much as you need as far as the meal that's provided at such a low cost that it's not hurting you, where they can provide even less than what we're providing and charge an obscene amount of money.
Right.
And you feel like, oh, well, no, that's how you're supposed to do it. And it's not necessarily the truth. Right? So take advantage of your church, take advantage of the local church. I'm not saying take advantage of them. I'm saying use what they offer, because even a visitation at a church or doing the whole service at the church is always going to, for the most part, be such a lesser cost than doing something at the funeral home.
Right. And we're here. We're family. So we want to be there to help you walk through this time and provide, usually one of our pastors on staff will do the service, the funeral. message. You'll have special music, and sometimes the family will share, which is very special. But just having that time together in one setting, and it's very peaceful here at the church, and so it's just great to be able to come together and have that comfort and strength.
Absolutely. And I think our pastors, especially my dad, does such an incredible job with funeral services as well. Don't ever feel like you need to hire out the pastor on at the funeral home or anything like that. We'd love to. And we do even funerals for people that just are part of the community.
Yes.
We got to offer a firefighter that passed away a couple years ago. And, anything we can do to help in that time, because there's already enough stresses that go along with it. There's already enough emotions that go along with it. You don't need to go in debt because of it as well.
Yes, that's true.
So that you're currently finalizing, I guess, that booklet.
Yes.
We're actually probably meeting about it tomorrow.
We are.
And signing off and getting all the things put in line. So I'm sure by the time this podcast actually reaches you guys, it will be done. So if you have a friend or family, or you'd like to look at it just to see what some of the options are, you can find us here at Christ Church. You can email Doris at dturner@christchurchfw.com, and I bet she'll have some stuff that she can send you.
Definitely.
Well, Pastor Doris, thank you so much for being a part of this. I think we kind of hit everything I wanted to. Not that we might not have a follow-up episode at some point to keep going, but I'd love for you to finish off by just giving some words of comfort to maybe those that the reason that they're watching this today is because they just lost someone, and someone in the church or a friend of theirs linked this video to them, and they're trying to struggle. They're struggling with, now what? A question that you had to overcome, a question that when we lose someone, we all have to go through. And so just give some comfort to those right now that maybe that's what they're dealing with.
I would encourage you just to have your expectations low. Just take one day at a time, and God's going to walk with you and be there to help you through it. I think one of my favorite verses through this whole process, and I have a little plaque next to my bed, is I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And that's from Philippians 4:13. And just probably in my moments where I had just sadness hit me, I would look at that plaque and say, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So I would just encourage you just to take it one day at a time. And even when you're looking forward to a holiday, or anticipating a holiday or an anniversary or a birthday, just know that it's going to be a different day. You can still celebrate in some way, however you choose to, and it's okay. You have to give yourself permission to say it's okay.
Wow.
For whatever you do in that day, it might look totally different, and that's fine. But just knowing that God's strength is going to be there, and we have this hope that we're going to be joined together someday when we get to heaven.
That's right.
So even though we're separated here on this earth right now, we know that someday we'll be together in heaven, and so I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Pastor Doris. And we actually made it the whole way without even having to pull a Kleenex. I thought I was going to be the one to cry. I'm not going to lie. But you kept it so clean for me. I appreciate it. Well, for all you guys, thanks again for watching the podcast. And we can't wait to see you in the next episode in a couple weeks. God bless.
God bless.
Thanks for joining us today here at the Movement Podcast. Once again, if you enjoyed the conversation, keep it going by dropping a comment or hitting the thumbs up button. If you have any ideas for future episodes, feel free to let us know. In order to know when our next episode comes out, please hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell so you can get notified when we put out future episodes. Thanks again for being part of the movement.